It began, as so many transboundary crises do in this era, not with a diplomatic note or a formal démarche, but with a late-night post on a social media platform. On February 9, 2026, President Donald Trump took to his Truth Social account to announce the effective killing of a decades-long multi-billion-dollar infrastructure project. The target was the Gordie Howe International Bridge, a sleek cable-stayed span nearing completion over the Detroit River, connecting Windsor, Ontario with Detroit, Michigan. With a few sentences, the president declared that he would not allow the bridge to open, demanding that the United States receive at least one-half ownership of the asset and full compensation from Canada. The $6.4 billion project, funded almost entirely by Canada, was suddenly a hostage in a burgeoning continental trade war. The immediate reaction in diplomatic circles and on the ground in Windsor and Detroit was one of stunned disbelief. For years, this bridge has been the symbol of cross-border cooperation, a necessary solution to a bottleneck that chokes the most significant trade corridor between the two nations. Yet here was a former real estate developer turned president, applying the high-pressure tactics of a New York land deal to a piece of critical international infrastructure. A source close to the White House framed it not as an act of economic sabotage, but as a masterclass in leverage. Trump is a builder at heart, the source told the New York Post, suggesting the president is simply using the tools of his former trade to extract maximum value for the American people. But for those whose livelihoods depend on the seamless flow of goods, it looked like nothing less than a self-inflicted wound. To understand the depth of the current conflict, one must go back to 2012, a moment of political paralysis in the United States. The existing Ambassador Bridge, an aging and often congested structure also connecting Detroit and Windsor, was owned by the Moran family, powerful private interests who fiercely opposed the creation of a publicly owned competitor. In Michigan, the state legislature, heavily influenced by these interests, refused to allocate funds for a new crossing. Facing an economic crisis that saw billions in trade delayed at the border, Canada took an unprecedented step. It offered to pay the entire cost of a new bridge on the U.S. side, a gesture of good faith and economic necessity that had no modern parallel. The deal, struck by then Michigan Governor Rick Snyder, a Republican, and the Canadian government, was hailed as a triumph of pragmatism. Canada would front the construction costs, estimated then at $4.6 billion, and recoup the investment through tolls collected over a 30-year period. The project would be publicly owned by the state of Michigan and Canada, a partnership that ensured both nations had skin in the game. This is a great deal for America, Governor Snyder later wrote, defending the agreement he had brokered. The arrangement provided Michigan with a new, modern crossing without costing its taxpayers a single dime, while also creating thousands of construction jobs on both sides of the border. Construction finally began in 2018, a slow-moving testament to the bureaucratic and engineering marvel of spanning one of the world's busiest waterways. The structure, named for the beloved Detroit Red Wings hockey legend Gordie Howe, was designed with 6 lanes, public art, and multi-use paths for cyclists and pedestrians. It was more than just concrete and steel. It was a monument to the idea that the longest undefended border in the world could be managed through mutual respect and shared economic destiny. By early 2026, after years of labor by American and Canadian workers using steel sourced from both countries, the bridge stood complete, awaiting its final inspections and a formal opening date. President Trump's narrative, however, paints a radically different picture. In his view, the arrangement is a symbol of American weakness and Canadian exploitation. He has repeatedly and incorrectly claimed that the bridge was built with virtually no U.S. content and that Canada owns both the Canada and the United States side. This framing is central to his political identity, the dealmaker arriving to fix a mess left by prior administrations, specifically blaming former President Barack Obama for granting waivers that allowed the project to proceed. For Trump, the fact that Canada holds the land on both sides of the crossing is an unacceptable infringement on American sovereignty. This is not just a dispute over a bridge. It is the latest and most visceral flashpoint in a rapidly deteriorating relationship between Washington and Ottawa. The two nations are already locked in a bitter trade war. Trump has repeatedly threatened Canada with crippling tariffs, most recently a 100% levy on Canadian goods if Prime Minister Mark Carney followed through on a trade deal with China. There are ongoing battles over Canadian dairy tariffs, which the president claims are exorbitant, and a dispute over Bombardier jets, where Trump threatened 50% tariffs unless Ottawa bought more American aircraft. The bridge in this context is simply the largest piece of leverage Trump has found. For Prime Minister Mark Carney, who assumed office pledging to stabilize relations with the United States, this represents a baptism by fire. Following a clear and direct phone call with the president, Carney emerged to project calm, insisting that the situation will be settled. He patiently explained the facts of the deal to Trump, reminding him that Canada paid for the bridge, that it was built by workers from both nations, and crucially, that the state of Michigan is already a co-owner of the asset. This is a great example of cooperation between our countries, Carney told reporters, his tone one of studied diplomacy in the face of bellicose rhetoric. The White House, however, has doubled down. Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt framed the president's stance as a righteous defense of American interests. The fact that Canada will control what crosses the Gordie Howe Bridge and will own the land on both sides is unacceptable to the president, she stated flatly. The administration's position is that the U.S. must have shared authority over the traffic and a direct cut of the economic benefits. This is, in their view, the essence of America First, a renegotiation of any deal, no matter how old or how settled, that does not explicitly favor the United States in every conceivable metric. The central question now being asked by legal scholars and international relations experts is a stark one. Does the President of the United States actually have the power to block the opening of a completed international bridge? The answer, disturbingly for many, is unclear. While Congress holds the power of the purse, the executive branch controls the border. The Department of Homeland Security officially designated the Gordie Howe Bridge as a port of entry on January 30th, a routine and necessary step for its operation. Revoking that designation or simply refusing to staff it with Customs and Border Patrol agents would effectively keep the bridge shuttered, regardless of its physical completeness. Insiders suggest this ambiguity is precisely the point. A White House official confirmed that the president believes it is within his authority to revoke any permits needed for the project. This tactic of using bureaucratic levers to halt construction or operation is one the administration has used before, freezing Army Corps of Engineers projects and holding up funds for infrastructure in political adversaries' districts. It transforms the bridge from a piece of infrastructure into a political bargaining chip, the value of which is measured not in tons of freight moved, but in concessions wrung from a negotiating partner. Complicating the narrative further is the shadow of private interests. Reports emerged shortly after Trump's social media posts that Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick met with billionaire Matt Marone, scion of the family that owns the rival Ambassador Bridge, just hours before the president went public with his threat. For decades, the Marone family has fought tooth and nail against the Gordie Howe project, viewing it as a government-subsidized threat to their profitable private monopoly on truck traffic. The optics of this meeting were damning, suggesting that a long-standing family grievance may have found a sympathetic ear in the Oval Office. The potential consequences of this decision are staggering in their economic magnitude. The Detroit-Windsor corridor is the busiest commercial land port on the U.S.-Canada border. In 2023 alone, over $126 billion worth of goods crossed the river, a flow that sustains hundreds of thousands of jobs in the auto industry, agriculture, and logistics. The Ambassador Bridge is currently operating at capacity, and any disruption or delay funnels down the supply chain with the force of a tsunami. A study from the University of Windsor estimated that the new bridge would save truckers an average of 20 minutes per trip, translating to $2.3 billion in savings over 3 decades. Blocking it doesn't just maintain the status quo, it actively denies the economy a massive efficiency gain. The human cost, often lost in discussions of tariffs and trade deficits, is equally profound. The construction of the Gordie Howe Bridge has been a major source of employment for union laborers on both sides of the river. For years, iron workers, cement masons, and engineers have dedicated their skills to this project. To see it completed only to remain vacant would be a devastating psychological and economic blow. "It's just insane," remarked Windsor Mayor Drew Dilkins, voicing the frustration of a community that has lived with construction noise and disruption for years, only to be told the reward at the end might be a bridge to nowhere. Michigan politicians, usually deeply divided along party lines, have found rare common ground in their opposition to Trump's move. Democratic Senator Elissa Slotkin was blunt in her assessment, warning that closing the project would be awful for our state's economy, leading to higher costs for businesses, less secure supply chains, and ultimately fewer jobs. Even former Governor Rick Snyder, a Republican, penned an op-ed arguing that the stoppage would primarily harm Americans. Governor Gretchen Whitmer's office pushed back, emphasizing the project as a tremendous example of bipartisan and international cooperation. In Michigan, this isn't a political abstract, it's an economic reality. This situation is being viewed in global capitals as a cautionary tale about the reliability of the United States as a partner. If a completed Canadian-funded bridge can be held hostage over a dispute on dairy tariffs or trade talks with China, what does that say about the sanctity of any international agreement? Analysts suggest that Canada's pivot toward a trade deal with China, which so enrages the president, is a direct consequence of the erratic behavior emanating from Washington. As Senator Slotkin noted, the only reason Canada is on the verge of a trade deal with China is because President Trump has kicked them in the teeth for a year. The bridge dispute is both a symptom and a cause of this realignment. The administration's strategy, viewed through the lens of Trump's real estate background, is classic brinkmanship. He is creating a crisis to force a negotiation. By halting the project, he gains a seat at a table he otherwise wouldn't have, demanding ownership stakes and toll revenues that were never part of the original bargain. It is a high-risk game of chicken played with the engine of the North American economy. As one analyst noted, the freeze on funding for projects in blue states during the recent government shutdown was a dry run for this kind of leverage, proving that the president is willing to weaponize infrastructure for political and economic gain. What happens next is a matter of intense speculation. The most immediate scenario involves frantic, high-level negotiations between Carney's team and Trump's newly empowered trade representatives led by Jamieson Greer. The president demanded that talks begin immediately, and the appointment of Ambassador Pete Hoekstra, a Michigander, to smooth the conversation suggests a possible off-ramp. A deal could theoretically be struck that gives the U.S. some face-saving measure of shared authority or a symbolic stake, allowing Trump to declare victory and open the gates. But the path to such a deal is littered with political landmines for Carney. Conceding to Trump's demands would set a dangerous precedent, effectively rewarding the tactic of threatening economic chaos to renegotiate settled contracts. It would signal to Washington that Canada will always bend to coercion, a lesson that would invite further demands. For a prime minister who has staked his reputation on a firm defense of Canadian sovereignty and interests, capitulation is a politically unpalatable option. The situation demands a diplomat of immense skill, capable of offering Trump a win without giving away the farm. Another, darker scenario involves the courts. Should Trump move to block the opening via executive order, a flurry of lawsuits would inevitably follow. The state of Michigan, private contractors, and even the Canadian government could challenge the president's authority to unilaterally close a designated port of entry. This would plunge the future of the bridge into a legal quagmire that could last for years, leaving the physical structure standing as a monument to litigation while trucks continue to crawl across the aging Ambassador Bridge. It is a scenario where no one wins, except perhaps the Moran family, who would see their monopoly preserved indefinitely. The ripple effects of this uncertainty are already being felt in the market. Business confidence, already shaky due to global inflation and high interest rates, is taking another hit. The CIBC morning market brief noted that geopolitical tensions, including the bridge threat, are weighing on the global economic outlook. Companies that rely on just-in-time delivery, the lifeblood of the auto industry, cannot plan for the long term when the primary point of entry might be shuttered. This uncertainty acts as a hidden tax on commerce, chilling investment and slowing growth on both sides of the border. Meanwhile, the president's list of grievances continues to expand, suggesting the bridge is just one item on a much larger bill. His social media post was a sweeping indictment of Canadian policy, from dairy tariffs to the supposed threat of China terminating ice hockey and eliminating the Stanley Cup, a bizarre rhetorical flourish that underscored the personal and almost whimsical nature of his anger. He is constructing a narrative where Canada is a dependent, ungrateful neighbor that must be taught a lesson in respect, and the bridge is the pedagogical tool of choice. For the citizens of Windsor and Detroit, who are more integrated than perhaps any other cross-border community in North America, the crisis feels deeply personal. Families are split by the river, economies are intertwined, and the local culture is a blend of American and Canadian sensibilities. The bridge was supposed to be a physical manifestation of that bond. Now it stands as a symbol of how quickly political rhetoric from a distant capital can destabilize a shared way of life. It has turned neighbors into pawns in a game they never agreed to play. Looking ahead, the coming weeks will determine whether this is a temporary rupture or a permanent scar. If negotiations fail, the administration could resort to its favored tool, tariffs. The president has already threatened a 100% tariff on Canadian goods in response to the China deal. He could easily frame the bridge impasse as further justification for economic warfare, raising the cost of everything from Canadian lumber and aluminum to agricultural products. For American consumers already weary from inflation, this would be a devastating blow, making the gas price skyrocket scenario all too real, as fuel costs are inherently tied to the efficient transport of goods. In this volatile atmosphere, the role of the U.S. ambassador, Pete Huckstra, becomes critical. A former congressman from Michigan, he understands the local stakes better than most in the White House. His task is to translate the abstract demands of the president into a tangible deal that doesn't crater his home state's economy. Whether he has the influence to do so remains an open question. The White House has shown little appetite for moderation, and the voices calling for a hardline approach, like Trade Chief Greer, currently have the president's ear. The international community watches with a mixture of horror and fascination. For allies in Europe and Asia, the treatment of Canada is a preview of their own potential fate. If the United States can threaten to close a border crossing with its closest friend and largest trading partner, no trade agreement is safe. The rules-based order that has governed global commerce since the end of World War II depends on the predictability of nations honoring their word. The Gordie Howe Bridge, a symbol of partnership, is in danger of becoming a symbol of its absence. As the sun rises over the Detroit River, casting long shadows from the twin towers of the new bridge, the silence on its empty deck is deafening. It is a silence filled with the potential roar of engines that may never come, the footsteps of travelers who may never walk its path. It stands as a monument to human ingenuity, held hostage by human caprice. The coming days will reveal whether diplomacy can build a bridge over the widening chasm of distrust, or whether this magnificent structure will become the world's most expensive and poignant symbol of a friendship gone sour.